Literally, God is shining us on this day with this beautiful day, the sunshine, this perfect weather, not only for all of us that are here at 9 o'clock, but in a special way in this weekend because we celebrate the sacrament of confirmation at the 10:30 Mass. Now, there's a place in our diocese that's important, a place in Northwest Indiana, I should say, but especially for our diocese, that is not very well known and not very well visited. Well, there are people there certain times of the year, certain days of the year, but normally it's not a place that people go. In fact, it's a place that people go, that is, go out of their way to not go to avoid. And it's not just the place itself, it's because where it is. And it's interesting because, as you know, the story of Jesus begins in a little town called Bethlehem. And according to the scriptures, Bethlehem is too small to be numbered among the princes of Judah. It's very, very tiny. It's obscure. It's next to nothing. It's insignificant. Well, it was before Jesus was born there. So our diocese, as you well know, is the Diocese of Gary. What that means, if you don't know or if you heard that before and kind of forgot about it, is that the Diocese of Gary is the diocese of that city from which we are named. And that city, Gary, is our diocese, or our diocesan name. We all relate to that because of what's located there, of this place that not many people go, or people go out of their way to avoid. And not just there, but of course the whole city of Gary, because of things that have happened there, and lots of ideas and opinions, and maybe even experiences that people have had relating to Gary. What I'm talking about is our diocese is the Diocese of Gary because in the city of Gary, and some of you know this because you've been there, is our cathedral. And our cathedral is named, if you haven't been there, you probably wouldn't know the name of it, and even if you have, you might not remember. The name of our cathedral is Guardian Angels, the Cathedral of the Holy Guardian Angels. And I bring that up because our bishop is visiting today, but also tomorrow is our feast day. It's not the Feast of the Holy Family. If you're thinking, like, when is that? That's in December, right after Christmas. But Monday, tomorrow, is the Feast of the Guardian Angels. For us, that's the principal feast, the feast day of our diocese. So whether or not you've been to the cathedral or wherever you go there, it's good for us to keep that in mind. But just like that city is avoided and now infamous, if anything, and maybe just a little bit obscure or obscured because of things that have happened there, so also that feast day can be rather obscure. That is, as we celebrate tomorrow our feast of the Holy Angels, well, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, okay? I know I've never seen one, but probably there's not many people in the world that have seen angels. And people have asked me, Father, what do they look like? And I have to tell, honestly, never seen one. I know that I will see one day, at least when I get to heaven, at least I hope to get there. And if I do, I will see the angels. But I've never seen one. So if you don't see it, if you can't see it, at least with our eyes, that means for a lot of people, it's not real. It's just really imaginary. It's an idea. It's like a fairy tale. It's not an idea. It's not imaginary. We can't see them, or normally we don't see them with our eyes, but they're very real, and they are with every one of us. So many years ago, when I was a young priest, I was in Michigan City, and there was a bit of a crisis in the parish, in particular the parish school. And the crisis was this: it was the spring, and that is the time, of course, where there is that important event there. I think they still have it in that parish, and many parishes do, and we have that here with the adults, they have that there, or had that there, with the 8th grade students, the Way of the Cross, the Via Crucis. So the 8th grade students would take all the parts, and if they still have it, they still do, of Jesus, of Mary, of all the soldiers, of the good thief, the bad thief, all of the other people in the Passion. So the problem, the crisis is that The 8th grade teachers and actually all of the other grade or junior high junior high teachers weighed in on the decision. They came up with the perfect boy to play Jesus. And they were very excited. They all agreed. They ran it past me and some other people, the pastor at that time, and we all agreed, that sounds great. The one problem was when they went to this student, he had no interest whatsoever in being Jesus. So we hear today in the gospel about saying yes and meaning yes. Well, that student said no, and he very much meant no. He had no interest in playing Jesus. Now what do we do? There wasn't a number 2 or number 3 or number 4 choice. He was the only one. He was the perfect candidate, so they didn't think past that. Now what do we do? Well, word got out among the students that he said no. Maybe he said something. But one of the students came forward and talked to the 8th grade teacher, his classroom, homeroom teacher that he had, and said, I understand you need someone to play Jesus. And the teacher looked at him, a little bit surprised that he knew that, and she said, yeah, that's true. Why are you bringing this up with me? And he said, because I want to play Jesus, and that was what she was afraid of. She did not want him to play Jesus. She would be the last student in that class, or he would be the last student in that class to play Jesus. And though he was in that homeroom, the other 8th grade teachers agreed, the other junior high teachers agreed that he was not the one to play Jesus. The crisis is that they went through others in the grade, and no one was willing. So out of default, she came back to him one day and said, if you're still interested in playing Jesus, and he said yes, so he got the job. We were all a little leery, a little afraid to see how exactly this would transpire. He was the class clown. He was almost failing some of his classes. He was not a model student, behavior-wise or academically. But yet, he really rose to the occasion. In my life and my many years of priesthood, I've seen many, many presentations, amazing presentations of the way of the cross, like the ones here that we have at St. Joseph Church. But yet, I don't think I've ever seen anyone in any of these that I've seen myself portray Jesus quite as sincerely and quite as beautifully as this young man who none of us thought would be interested, let alone qualified to do this, because he wouldn't take it seriously. He really did. And what explanation is there for that? Well, a couple things came to mind back then, and I've always thought about that when I remember, and I always remember that. Every Lent that comes around, I think about that Stations of the Cross that happened back in 1997 or 98 or whenever that was. And I remember thinking back then, well, clearly it wasn't the teacher's choice, it wasn't the pastor's choice, it wasn't the principal's choice, my choice, his parents' choice. He also had parents that were a little skeptical about this, and they weren't really supportive, but they said, if they say yes, you can do this. But yet, although he didn't have anyone really supporting him, he did it, not because of us, but because that was the year that he and his classmates received the gift of the Holy Spirit. Again, that is, of confirmation. And even though he was not yet confirmed, in the confirmation preparation, that's one of the things that he didn't take seriously, but all of a sudden, when he got that job to play Jesus, he took it very seriously. It was really quite incredible to see that change. So, though he hadn't received the Holy Spirit again in confirmation, I remember thinking clearly the Holy Spirit was behind that choice and behind that change in his life. And I remember thinking also, perhaps because there are patrons, the guardian angels, I remember thinking, I bet his guardian angel and maybe all of our guardian angels, his teachers and the principal and the pastors and my guardian angels, all kind of got together on this one and put him forward and gave him this inspiration or helped him to realize what God, the Holy Spirit, was prompting him to do. Maybe that was all my imagination. I can't tell you for sure, but I can tell you how shocked I was in a very good sense, happily surprised of the job that he did, how he really took that to heart, how he said yes. The young man that we wanted said no, and he meant it. He didn't even say yes like this man in the gospel, sure, I'll do it, and decided not to do it. From the very beginning, it was no. No, this young man presented himself and did it so well. And so our life, and especially our life of faith, is about choice. And we have the most outstanding example of anyone who chose wisely before us today and all the days of this month. Today actually is the feast of the Little Flower. Interestingly enough, because before he was Bishop McClory, when he was Monsignor, Father McClory, he was in Detroit at the Parish of the Little Flower. So she had a part to play, and our bishop, I think, too. In any case, one thing that always moved me, that the Little Flower, St. Teresa, the Child Jesus, as she's officially known in the church, said, was something she said about our patrons. We are the parish, as you know, of the Holy Family. And she said once that what helps her so much about the Holy Family, about Mary, about Joseph, about Jesus when he was growing up, is that the Holy Family presented to us in the Gospels were so very ordinary. So much so that they said about Jesus when he grew up, what good can come from Nazareth? And they weren't just talking about him. They were talking about, isn't he the carpenter's son? They said that too. A carpenter? Really? Why should we listen to someone who grew up being taught by a father who's a carpenter? That's not important. Why should we listen to someone who is a mother of Mary? She's probably the most obscure, the most quiet of all of the people in that town, in that region. But yet we know about Mary now. They were so very ordinary, meaning Mary never worked a miracle in Nazareth. At least we don't know about it. Nor did Joseph. And Jesus didn't work his miracles until he got out of the house, until he began his ministry. So they were very ordinary, that is, like your family, like mine, like our family, like this parish. But yet, even though they were ordinary, they were very extraordinary. And the Little Flower says, what we have to do, because we can only do ordinary things, is we have to do our ordinary things and live our ordinary life with extraordinary love. And that's what she did, and that's why she became a saint very appropriately on this day in which our young people are receiving confirmation. The Little Flower, she was 24 years old when she died. So think about that. She was 24 when she became a saint. I was no saint when I was 24. I'm 30 years past that, and I'm no saint now. But I can't even begin to imagine. I've always thought about that. How could one become a saint, especially by 24? Well, she did, because she really took that to heart in our ordinary life, and that's the life that we all have. Sometimes we are called to do extraordinary things, but it's more about the day-to-day, the ordinary. She lived her short life with extraordinary love, and that is why she became a great saint. That's why the Holy Family is so important, not just because it's Mary, the Mother of God, the great Saint Joseph and Jesus, but because they lived their ordinary life together in an extraordinary way with extraordinary love, so much so that people didn't even notice. They didn't see it. It's not about other people noticing, but it's about doing that because our hearts are in it, like that young man who portrayed Jesus so well, who really became Jesus on that day in which his class presented the way of the cross. Today, as we come to receive Jesus in the Holy Eucharist, we hear in that beautiful second reading that Jesus humbles himself, becoming obedient. Being obedient means saying yes, even when you don't want to say yes, when you really want to say no. But to really mean that yes, unlike that young man, sure, I'll do it. I'm not going to do it. He wasn't going to do it. He didn't plan on doing it. He did do it. But to really say yes, even when we don't want to say yes, Jesus did. He humbled himself, becoming obedient, even unto death, death on a cross. He did that because he said yes to God, the Father, who asked him to do that. And he said yes to God because he was asked by the Father, and also because he loves you. He did that out of love for you and for me. He does this. He becomes present here in the Holy Eucharist today and every time we come to Mass because he loves you. Today, on this day in which our bishop visits, on this day in which our parish celebrates confirmation, let's hear and follow the Holy Spirit. Let's say yes, like St. Teresa, like Mary does. And let's do that with all.